It's great to be here on this. I guess hopefully we can see beginning of spring coming, at least for us on the East Coast. Is that the same for you, Hayley?
We've got blue sky day here in New York City.
That's
Thank
great. I
goodness.
think it's same for us here in Raleigh. Well, day three, last day. It's great to be a part of Startup Grind. I was just telling, I think it was Derek just the other day, just how sad I am that we're not together. But hopefully we'll get to see each other in person next year. But very grateful that the team's been able to put this fantastic thing together already. So I'm excited to be able to spend some time with you, Hayley, over the next 30 minutes or so, and just dive into some great topics around early stage funding. I did chuckle at the title a little bit because like this is pretty big. Like this is absolutely everything.
So, it's an ambitious scope, but we'll do our best, right?
Super ambitious. So this is I've been on the VC stage a few times, but for folks that are new to me, my name is Jason Williamson, and I look after Oracle's startup program, all things startups and VC. And I'm really excited to have Hayley join us today. And so we'll just kind of have a conversation about her background experience. So if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are, although folks probably know, but if you could give us a little background and then we could dive right in.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you the short version. But I'm currently a partner at First Round Capital, which is a seed stage VC firm. I'm based in New York. My career background, I had started my career in consulting with a passion for consumer businesses and decision making. And it was when I was at Harvard Business School that I jumped into entrepreneurship. So I started a subscription e-commerce business called Birchbox, which was seed funded by First Round, where I'm now an investment partner. I scaled that business to over 1 million monthly paying subscribers, and really proud of the value we built there, but also the sort of subscription revolution and the industry that we inspired as well. And, I never anticipated shifting over into an investment role, but I was really inspired to do so with the platform of First Rounds because we work in service of founders. We really think about venture as a product and how we can scale that to work alongside founders as they're finding product market fit and building their company in the earliest stages.
So talk to me a little bit more about what you mean by venture as a product. Like I don't think people have heard that turn of phrase before. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it is atypical. I think the standard venture firm thinks about a portfolio and one-to-one relationships between the venture firm or a venture partner and that company. That is not really scalable. As you add additional companies to that portfolio, that dilutes the value or the time that can be spent with each individual company. First Round was founded with the idea of how can you make venture scalable? How can you think about it as a product that scales? So instead of a portfolio, we think about building a community and building a series of products to serve that community, to connect all of the founders and in fact, everyone working within a portfolio company to each other, so that as you add more portfolio companies, the value of the community actually grows. Other examples of how we think about venture as a product is, we've productized things like, we invest at the seed stage. The next round would be the Series A. We have something called Pitch Assist, where we have productized building great pitch decks. We invest in founders who are awesome at building businesses, not awesome at PowerPoint. So how can we create a repeatable process to help them with that?
So how early do you engage? And then maybe talk to us about what early stage means, because we throw around these terms all the time, like early stage and seed round. And like, I don't necessarily think these labels mean a whole lot. It's just kind of where you are in the
totally
life cycle of that. So when you guys say early stage and when you say early, A, what do you mean by that? And then B, how early are you engaging? Because it's super interesting to hear that you're investing in people and helping somebody build a pitch deck. It's that.
Yeah, so we tried to put it in our name, right? First round.
Right. Good tip. Yeah, that's a
but
tip.
But it has, the early stage has gotten increasingly complex with lots of different names. But we do everything from, a person with an idea, no revenue, no product. Maybe that person's raising $1 million to hire a few people and to get a few questions answered, all the way up to what we call mango seeds, which are these like really juicy seed rounds that are happening these days, which could be $5 million or $7 million seed rounds. And, it's not necessarily company progress that differentiates how much you're raising. But yeah, we do seed defined broadly.
It is, I don't want to use the word danger, but like, are there any, like, what are the risks that you see, or like, I don't know, concerns or things to think about with these mango seed rounds? I mean, or the answer could be like, they're awesome, I want to see more of those.
Well, I think first, it's not the norm. Yeah, right. Yeah. What we are typically seeing in today's market is actually sort of this like rolling kind of fundraise. There's increasing sources of capital. There's increasing amounts of capital available to early stage founders. So it often starts with something like a 500K angel round or pre-seed rounds, which then goes into a seed round of maybe $2.5 to $3 million. And sometimes there's a second seed, which is the 5 to 7. So it's not always skipping to that big round. Usually there's like an escalation, I guess.
Sure.
But what are the dangers? I mean, there's definitely overcapitalization is something that ironically is a risk. With larger rounds comes higher valuations, which means that you're setting the bar higher for what you have to achieve with the capital that you've raised. And if you're raising a big round off of just like a hypothesis, it's possible that it might be disproven. And then you're sort of left with having set a high valuation, having hired a bunch of people, but that your idea wasn't pressure tested. So that's why I think it's more prudent generally to raise basically 18 to 24 months of runway to be really clear about what milestones you want to hit. And great if you have a little bit of cushion in there, both for the upside in case things go really well and you want to lean into hiring more people or growing a little bit faster, but also for the downside should deadlines slip or some things not go as you anticipated.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I'm thinking back on like the very first term sheet I think I ever got on an idea that like was just kind of an MVP with no customers. And as a founder, I was kind of disappointed in the valuation. And this was right before the bubble burst in 2000, when, you could like raise 10 million off the back of a napkin kind of thing. And, but then it ended up being kind of a good thing, right? Because we did have to go through, so 9/11 came, and then like that just changed kind of how people were raising and what's going to happen. And so what that meant was like when we had to raise another round, it changed our valuation, and what a kind of a gift it was that we weren't valuated at what I thought we should have been, right? Because it was painful anyway to have to like go through, have to rejigger the cap table. So kind of on the heels of that, bootstrapping is, and I kind of get back and forth in this debate with early stage founders, and I love your perspective on this. So like bootstrapping is obviously an option for early stage. There's pros and cons to that. So how do you encourage founders to think about bootstrapping, and for how long, versus like kind of what you just said, like maybe pursuing some seed stuff on an idea? And, how do maybe friends and family complicate or assist in that process?
Yeah. So, I mean, the vast majority of businesses started in the US outside of startups are bootstrapped in some way or never raised venture funding.
Right.
And I think as, you know, as the like zeitgeist of startups and technology have like taken over the narrative, I think it can be confusing for people to think through, should I be a venture funded business or should I not? Like, should I be getting a small business loan, or should I be, you know, bootstrapping essentially means growing the business based on the revenue that you're getting from the customers that you have. Fantastic. So bootstrapping and not taking outside investor money gives you a lot more control, not only over ownership and governance and what direction you want to take the business, but what ultimate outcomes you're shooting for. And taking venture money or taking any money is aligning yourself with stakeholders that have their own specific incentives. They have their own definition of success. With taking institutional venture capital money, that definition of success is for that company to grow as big as it can on a relatively fast time frame.
Right.
And what I encourage founders is to ask themselves what their goals are.
Right.
Do you want to be in a place where you receive $100 million acquisition offer and there's people who are on, who have invested in your business, who are on your cap table, who say, no, don't take it, go bigger? How would that feel to you as a founder? That could be life-changing. Do you want to be running a public company one day, or do you want to be running a business that has 500 employees? Right. Are you okay with prioritizing growth over profitability for a certain period of time? And it's okay to answer no to those questions, to say like, hey, we'd be happy with a $25 million acquisition offer 5 years from now. And just be honest with yourself about what you're shooting for, and be clear-eyed about what it means to put stakeholders on your cap table who have perhaps very specific definitions of success and if they're different than your own.
I think you've hit a really interesting point here, because it was something you and I had talked about earlier in the other subscription box company that I was telling you about, where his tension was he had hit profitability, and his mindset is profitability because that's just how he's wired. Like, I have a company, I want to be profitable, and then the A round investor is like, well, why would you want that? You need subscribers more than anything. Forget about profitability because you want to have a big acquisition, you know? And so then that kind of reminds me too of these conversations that I was remembering having kind of in the early stage of my thing, like, maybe this is a lifestyle business. Like, maybe I don't mind running a $3 million business for forever, you know? And so I think it's really, from a founder perspective, it's worth going through an exercise to kind of maybe define what those guardrails are for you, to say, hey, our goal is I want an IPO, or I want a $100 million takeout, because those are life-changing. But, you know, maybe this is,
and I think it's confusing, Jason, often because like the only thing that is in the press for a lot of these businesses is the money raised or the valuation. But ultimately what matters the most is the fundamentals of the business. So the quality of the revenue you have, your margins, the profitability, how happy your customers are. And yeah, I think it's because it's such a public and external signal that people focus often too much on like, oh, I'm successful if I raise money, when it's actually the money is a means to an end, which is achieving your business goals as a founder.
Right. And I realize for a lot of people listening to this who are like super early, like, gee, what a neat problem to have. Should I take 25 million or 150 million? You know what I mean? But it is important to preset kind of what your values are, aligned with your desires and goals and outcomes and things like that.
And be able to like, I don't think you should bend those in order to get your business funded.
Yes, right.
Because ideally, the people that you are taking on as investors are aligned both with like your vision, long-term vision of what you're building, but also the path that you want to take there. And it's important to be able to know what your goals are, be able to share them explicitly and make sure they match.
I would love your perspective on this. I've always kind of believed that no's are good, right? And so like I get a no for a job offer, I get a no for an investor, and those could be good, right? Because of what you just said on alignment, right? So
thank you for saying that, because I have to say no so often in my role.
Right? So what's it like? And we're, and then I'll pivot kind of the conversation a little bit, but from an investor perspective, do you say no to good ideas? And if so, why? Okay. Talk to me about
all the time.
Right.
So there's a few different reasons. I'll list a few of them. Sometimes I say no to good ideas because they're good ideas, but they won't hit that definition of success that I talked about for our funds. I see a path to, this could be a great $50 million business that you could run profitably. Amazing. I need to be able to see a clear path to $100 million of revenue and a valuation one day that is $1 billion plus. That doesn't mean your business is bad. It's just not a fit for our fund model. The other reason that I say no is investors are people who need to choose how they spend their time, right? We only have a few slots in each fund, and we all have our own interests, passions, etc. And sometimes there's good businesses that are just, I don't think I will be excited to work on that business over the next 5 years and help that founder on their journey. And I think it's important that I don't force myself to do that. And also that the founder has people who are just as enthusiastic about what they're building as they are. And if I don't see myself matching up with that, that's another reason that I say no. And then sometimes there's like good ideas, but it's the wrong team. So that's another category of no.
That's interesting. Well, it's good, I think, for founders to hear this, because no's can be good, and no's are not necessarily invalidation of what they're doing. It's just, making sure you find that right fit. It reminds me of just even how one would pick a university in many respects. Like, it's okay, right? Like some of them are good for you, some of them aren't. So let's shift a little bit on kind of some of these trends that you're seeing from the big funds, like kind of maybe going, I'm going to say the word downstream. I just mean kind of easing their way into some of this stuff that you guys are doing. What's your take on that? And like, do you think there's going to be a long-term impact? And do you think they can do it? And what's your
great
thoughts?
Question. Yeah, so it's a definite trend. Really, really picked up in 2020 that you're reading about these seed rounds that are led by Sequoia, a seed round led by Andreessen, a seed round led by Benchmark, that you would traditionally think of as being Series A or later.
Right.
A lot of these firms had been playing in early stage to some extent over the last 5 to 10 years, but doing it in a different way. So often through scout programs where they would be, having angel investors invest capital on their behalf, or being like a small part of a round, but not the lead investor in a seed round. Okay. But now it's shifted, and they're leading, and they're taking sometimes the full round. So I guess I could evaluate this by like, why are the funds doing it? But then it's like, what should founders be thinking about if they have the option to be taking multi-stage money at the seed? In terms of why the multi-stage fund's doing it, like the economics just work for them. It's essentially buying an option with such a large amount of capital under management. They're able to get a sort of preview and early access to what could be the next hot Series A or Series B. And then they get sort of proprietary access to it. They're buying an option. Right. And I see why it's alluring to founders as well. These funds are able to do bigger rounds at higher valuations. They've got great brand names. And if things go well, there's the possibility that you like find your forever venture fund in your first year of business, right? And that fund leads your seed, your A, your B, your pre-IPO rounds, you're good. You never need to go out to fundraise ever again. But that's the success case. I think what founders need to watch out for are a few things. First, these firms aren't purpose-built to support founders at the earliest stages in the like search for product market fit, some of the hands-on company building work. And yeah, I think some founders are like, okay, great, I don't need that help, I'm good. But if you would like someone who could be side by side with you, having experienced the 0 to 1 phase, you know, again and again and again, you find that more in an institutional seed fund. And then not everyone hits the success path of being obvious that this multi-stage fund should lead your next round. They can't follow on in every seed deal that they lead. And there is the possibility that you're left with what's called a signaling risk of you have a multi-stage fund who could clearly have the capital to be leading your next round, and they're not. So when you go out to meet their peer funds and say, you know, here's what I've accomplished since my seed, all these great things, and you're asked the question, who did your seed round? If it's a multi-stage fund, that new investor is going to wonder, why am I seeing this? If you already have XYZ on your cap table. So, you know, I think in the next few years, the other shoe may drop for a few of these founders who have chosen to go on that path. And we'll see. I think some will have that great glide path with, you know, they keep on getting funded. But others might wish that they had taken sort of the local train instead of the express train.
I like that. So like then, you know, kind of what you're describing loosely might be like, it's kind of like a marriage, you know, you're kind of connected to them in a way that it's not trivial to disconnect.
Totally.
Right?
It's hard to avoid the like relationship analogies.
It is, right?
Founder relationships. I think it's like getting married to your high school girlfriends or boyfriends.
I did that.
And we're working out for you, right?
You
have like 5 kids or something.
It was like 10.
But
you're right. Yeah, I didn't mean to like
very important decision early in life.
Yeah, right. And so like, sorry, I didn't mean to like derail your example there, but yeah, no, it's exactly right. So like and it's funny because you know, going back to that analogy, especially with the high school, you know, sweetheart thing, is you end up learning through a lot of mistakes because you're going to make them. Like every young person makes them, every new startup makes them. And so I guess
mistakes, but also like your business model and product will evolve. And like we're used to that as a seed fund. Sometimes there are like complete 180s, and it was a great team going after a specific hypothesis in a specific market. They disprove that hypothesis, and we let them take 6 months to figure out, should they be directing their talents and efforts elsewhere. And because we're a generalist fund, we could support them in that. Be like, okay, great, you were B2B, now you're consumer social. Like, let's do this. We've got the capacity to help you, you know, figure out how to scale that too. But if you tie yourself to a specific partner who's like the enterprise infrastructure person,
right? They're only
and you need to go through a similar, then you might be orphaned, so to say.
So then, you know, going back to that relationship analogy, I guess, you know, what kind of questions should founders be asking of their you know, partner, I guess, in their courtship to keep riding this to death?
Yeah, it's funny because it's like I fundraised multiple times for Birchbox and learned a lot in the first time we went out for fundraising, and it's this weird adjustment that you have to make. First, you are pitching, you are trying to convince, you know, these partners why they should give you their money. But you have to remember, once you get that offer, you stop and you turn the tables. And they have to convince you why they should have the right to be able to get equity in your company in exchange for their money. And yeah, and I think too often founders are like, pitch. Someone gave me an offer, yes, without stopping and doing the like, all right, now I'm going to ask you some questions. So questions you should ask. I think the most important thing is remembering that you're getting in, like, it's the partner is more important than the firm, that individual person. And ask for references. Talk to founders that person has invested in before. Ask them for their list. Ask it to be half companies that are like doing great outcomes, on a path to success, and ask them for founders where it went to zero, didn't work out, because you want to understand how that partner behaves in both scenarios. And then try your best to do back channel as well. So, figure out what companies are in that firm's portfolio, reach out through LinkedIn, try to do some off-list references. And I think, of course, there's questions that you should be asking directly face-to-face, but I think you learn the most by talking to the founders to understand how they were supported by the investors they work with.
I think you've made some really great points, because a lot of people like get that first term sheet. They get, especially if you're earlier and it's your first time, you're just like, oh, this is great. This must be a deal I should take. And so that's really fantastic advice.
Yeah, I think everything changes when you get that first offer. Like that's actually when you accelerate being like, okay, I could make this into a competitive round, both to generate more interest or to negotiate terms. And so as tempting as it is, to just take it.
Right.
You got it.
Right. Yeah. So we've got about 10 minutes left. Let me just throw a couple of questions out there. And if people want to throw things into the chat, or the team can be able to foster those for us. But just a couple of things. So what kinds of, because I know you're going to answer this through the lens of the things that you care about, but like when you look at an idea, what are a couple factors that you consider when making your decision? You've already talked about, like, you've got very small slices of time. You talk about what your passions are. What other things do you consider when you kind of make that decision?
Totally. So the broad framework, how we think about making decisions is, we evaluate the team, we evaluate the market, we evaluate the product. And it's actually in that order, surprisingly, perhaps. So founders are by far the most important thing that we invest in at the early stage. We think about, what is the founder market fit? Like, why is this team the best team in the universe to go after this?
For that, okay.
Right, because I said before, there could be good businesses, but you're like, why is that person going to be able to pull this off? There has to be a fit between the two.
Can you double click on that a little bit? If you're a first-time founder and it's not like, hey, I've never started 3 companies, I don't have a huge track record. What are some attributes?
It doesn't have to be I started 3 businesses before I'm a huge success.
Right.
But I think you have to be able to tell a narrative to an investor about, what was the inspiration and what is your motivation to do what is an insanely hard thing of creating something from nothing. And there must be, whether it could be, something you experienced in your personal life or how you were raised. It could be because of you're a subject matter expert, having been an employee or a leader within other businesses, or it could be because you actually are an outsider to the industry and you're applying some other skill set or tool set to be able to rethink how a market or a product should be working. And I actually think when I was a founder, I fit into that bucket. I'd never worked in beauty before. In fact, I wasn't really a consumer of beauty products, but I had a skill set from, first I had like my unique experience as a consumer of the category. I had my skill set from consulting to be able to think more analytically and creatively about business models that perhaps an industry insider wouldn't have been able to think through. So yeah, that's it. So founder market fit. We do think about like track record of success, but it doesn't have to be, oh, you've done a venture funded business before. It could be just like, when did you go off the conveyor belt previously? There's the difference between a student who just does what's expected of them and the person who starts a new club or designs their own major, or on the side was, paid for college by doing XYZ sort of job. And those sort of stories help us see how someone has made choices to be different or exceptional before they decided to go out and fundraise for their startup. And yeah, so the team is the most important thing for us.
That's great. And then you said, can you just say a couple words on market and why that comes before product?
Yeah, so it comes before product because at the early stages, the product will change. Okay. And a lot of how we evaluate product actually just loops back to the founding team. Okay. So we'll look at an early demo, we'll look at a prototype. And what we look for in that is a reflection of how the founding team thinks. What are the decisions that they made? What are the open questions that they have? What are they prioritizing in the roadmap next? And because we're investing in a team who could be, as my partner Josh says, like a heat-seeking missile for product market fit, we're not looking at the product as it exists today in a moment in time and being like, is this fantastic? We're investing in like the team's ability to be able to like navigate and evolve the product. Yeah. So we take an example. One of the earliest companies I invested in at first rounds is a company called Mirror, which sold this past summer to Lululemon, to at-home fitness hardware device. We invested at the seed round. It was 2 years before that product was sold to its first customer. 2 years of iteration and perfecting the hardware, software, and content. We saw a prototype of that product. But what we saw in that prototype was a reflection of the founder, no pun intended, of how the founder was thinking, the grit that she had to be able to put it together. And, it was like a hack together kind of thing, but it helped us understand where she wanted to go. Right.
That's great. So it would probably be weird if I didn't ask you a pandemic question. So how I guess has it impacted how you, like how you're seeing deals, how quickly you're going through them? Like, is your deal volume and processing going up? Is it down? Like, what kind of efficiencies do you think are going to stay after things loosen up? Like, so what changes are happening that you think might stick? And is it good or bad?
So crazy now that it's been almost a year of this. I remember our first few pandemic pitches and how difficult it was to think about deploying new capital when we were so concerned with helping our portfolio companies navigate the uncertainty of a global crisis. So there was like a few months period where we were like, let's wait and see and figure out how this all shakes out, both in terms of the economic environment, how our portfolio is going to fare. But then very quickly, starting about early summer, it just took off. A decisive ramp up in activity. And the things that we are seeing is increased velocity. So time to meeting a company, to needing to make a decision to issue a term sheet has compressed significantly. I love that there's been increased access, right? I don't even know where many of my founders are pitching me from. So where it used to be like, okay, who's going to come to have a face-to-face meeting with me in New York? Now it's really opened up the top of the funnel to be, no matter where they are. We focus on the US, but it's increased access. So as we look forward with optimism to in person being safe again, I'm actually quite confident that some of the Zoom fundraising dynamics will stay. I think it's much more efficient for founders. The fact that they could meet more investors sitting, in an environment that they control, pack 10 meetings on one day instead of 3. Right. I think it's going to be hard to shift away from that for the first meeting, at least. But then I do think in terms of building relationships, winning the term sheets that you deliver, or founders wanting to evaluate who it is that they're working with, I would hope that, when it's safe, some of those more human, face-to-face, high bandwidth interactions could come back into play.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let me just kind of wrap up with, and we'll see if we're able to take some questions or not. I'm not sure if we will, but just kind of some parting advice, I guess, for founders who are just trying to understand the space and navigate kind of early stage VCs, just some a bit of wisdom that you could maybe give as we wrap up.
Yeah. So when I think back to my own founder experience, especially as we were just getting started and trying to, figure out what a convertible note was, or what some of these, what's a TAM, writing in our notebook. We'll Google that later.
Oh yeah, TAM.
The thing that I benefited from the most was developing a peer group of other founders at similar stages or who were just a little bit ahead of us. And I think I really encourage the founders in the audience to do that, to let down their guard and to find a group of 3 to 5 folks who, not competitive businesses, but maybe similar stages where they could be truly honest, where they don't have to be like, oh, I've got it all figured out, I know exactly how to fundraise, but where they could text that person at midnight and be like, shit, I just got asked this, whether it's an internal thing or an external thing, and that you could support each other through that. Great. And that's part of what we have built at First Round with what I said about making, community as a product where we are able to plug founders into helping each other, as opposed to always having to go through the investor to get their questions answered or to understand best practices. And I will also say that if you are doing that, building a peer group of other founders, please think about having diverse perspectives in that group. Because if it's just men helping men, or female founders only helping female founders, the educational backgrounds, etc., if you could think about having diversity of perspectives in that group, I think it will make you a better leader. But it will also help distribute the best practices more evenly across the founder landscape.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned kind of that connection group. We actually experimented with this kind of when all of this started, because a part of what we saw was a need for founders was just to have connectedness and just the common spaces, and how do they even get connectedness when it's not there? So we actually started to create these community groups of cohorts of founders with different viewpoints, differing backgrounds, and even locations. We kind of bring them together on a biweekly basis, and it's been really cool to watch kind of some of these topics, like, oh my gosh, I've got a lawsuit with a founder, what do I do? All these kinds of things where people can actually get I'll use this word, maybe it's too much, but a level of intimacy with someone in your bucket. I think that's we can't underestimate the value of that. Humans were meant to be in proximity with each other. And so, especially for this stage. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. I think it's as much as we're remote, there's a decreasing friction to creating connections when everything's virtual. You're able to do it across geographic boundaries. You're able to do it, without having to commute. So I think there was one question from the group about where do you find these?
How do you do that? Especially when you're at home all day.
At similar stages, I think one connection away is always a great way to do it. So think about who works at a startup that you can say, hey, would you be able to introduce me to your co-founder to talk about their experience fundraising? The cold email works. The one connection away works. Any conversation you have at the end, say, hey, here's a few things I'm thinking about. Can you think of like 1 to 2 people who might have relevant experience? And some of those interactions might be more transactional, but others might turn into sort of persistent peer relationships over time.
Yeah. And I think it's important to realize, like, look where we are right now. Like, that's what Startup Grind's for, So like, you're surrounded, with the question answer, like, ask her, you're like surrounded by people like this. So I think that's great. Well, hey, thanks for your time today. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for the great questions, Jason.
It was a good time. And so go enjoy your balmy 41 degrees today. So.
Yeah, inside on all my Zoom meetings, but you
exactly.
too.
Yeah.
And thank you. Thank you for a great session.